and welcome back. So today I want to talk all about kind of just the writing process and how you can go about executing your ideas. I know this is the hardest part of it because, like I said in the previous video, the chunkiest bit of time will be writing, and what I find is that a lot of creators struggle to actually integrate the writing into their day-to-day life. So like I said, if you have the structure to support you having writing time to begin with, that's going to feel a lot easier to do, and then you've got to just practice discipline with it. It's like if you were building a habit, like maybe in the beginning stages of your business before you had a team member helping you, if you were creating your content and scheduling it ahead of time, that might be a habit you've built out. Or engaging and like having the engagement steps and having the engagement time and like just doing that every day, it's like a habit, right? So writing's kind of similar. You just need to build a habit and have discipline to do it regularly. It doesn't have to be daily, it just has to be regularly, right? So of course, everything that's going to make that feel easier is knowing what you're going to spend that writing time doing. So depending on whether you have like a fiction book idea or a memoir idea or a non-fiction self-help book idea, whatever it is, start by figuring out what is your idea, right? And so I think that our ideas can come through at different stages and they can look a bit different. What I try to get my clients to do first and foremost is get clear on like their major big 3 plot points or things they want to talk about in their book, right? And so I'm actually going to like kind of give you a bit of an example here because I think it could be helpful for you about the first book I ever wrote. It's not the first book I wrote, it's the first proper book that was publishable that I wrote, I should say. I remember exactly how this happened, and I kind of want to walk you through it because it demonstrates this very well. So what happened, and if you listen to the previous module, you'll hear I get my ideas a lot when I'm traveling. This was so funny because this is exactly how this happened. I was on a holiday with my friend, and I'm probably like the most boring coach in the world because I don't really like traveling that much. Like I will go out and travel for things, but I'm a real homebody. Like I love to be at home. And so I was invited on this holiday to an island. It sounds great, doesn't it? And I was like, I don't want to be here. I want to be at home. And I don't know, I went because I thought it would be fun, but I just found myself not really having a good time there. And I just wanted to be at home. I just wanted to go home and play The Sims. And I just didn't want to be at the pool, and I wasn't having a good time. And I remember sitting at the pool, like not even in the pool, just sitting on the edge of the pool and being super boring. And just thinking about this crush I had in high school. It's so embarrassing. And I was just thinking to myself, oh, just wouldn't it be funny if he just like showed up here and then we just started talking and maybe like hit off something. And it was ridiculous because he didn't even care who I was. But it was just this like fantasy that kept me occupied while I'm sitting at the pool, bored out of my mind, not wanting to be there, right? And by an hour had passed, I just thought up all these crazy scenarios and fantasies, and I was like, you know, this could be a book. And I'm like, this is like kind of developing, and I have kind of got these ideas for characters. So my crush, I turned him into a character. He was like the main love interest, and then I turned myself into another character and developed it from there. So like I kind of took the bare bones idea and developed it into like their own individual characters with traits and interests and whatnot. So that's kind of how that started. And then I thought about what are some crazy scenarios that might happen on this island, and I thought we could go kayaking and this thing could happen, and we could go to a hotel room and this could happen, and we could go to the other side of the island and do this, and like I just got all these ideas while I was there. It's like this just kept developing. Like it didn't all happen at once. It wasn't like I sat there for a whole day and went, boom, I have a whole book idea. It was like, it just developed over the course of the week, like all these ideas. And even then I didn't have a full idea, but I did have like my major plot point ideas. And I don't remember what they are now because this was like 10 years ago. But I know I wanted to write like an enemies to lovers type romance book because this crush that I had didn't care who I was, and I felt like it was like the perfect embodiment of someone who doesn't like me, right? And I was like, let's make that character into a reality. So I basically wrote this in a week. Like I got home from the holiday and I sat down at the computer and I just started writing. And I was like, okay, we're in the early stages, they don't like each other, here's some things that could happen. I just started kind of like pantsing it, and that means like just writing by the seat of your pants without a plan. I was like, let's just have these couple of first chapters look like this, and I wrote them out. And then I was like, okay, now they have to start getting to know each other, they have to start actually getting to like each other. So I wrote those next few chapters and I went, okay, they're starting to like each other. How do we get them to kiss for the first time? And I like wrote those chapters, and then I went, okay, now they've had the first kiss, how do we start to build trust? And I wrote those chapters, and then I went, okay, and then like we need like a conflict. So I really just pantsed it. I just kind of did it day by day, just exploring it, kind of just letting the narrative flow out as I wanted. Nowadays I plan a bit more with my books, but this was very much like just wrote it out, saw how it went. And I will say my first draft was terrible. And like this was one of my very first books, so it was really bad. But it's also proof that you can make a bad draft good, because what happened was the way it first came out was that my characters, one minute they'd be very hot on each other, and then the next minute they'd be very cold on each other, because I hadn't really learned how to execute a romance that builds over time. And I was like, they're meant to be like enemies to lovers, and this is not meant to be so sudden that they're meant to fall in love. So like it was very up and down as I wrote it. And what I ended up doing was I went back through it a couple of times, and I just knew that my skill level wasn't there yet to make it what I wanted it to be. A good narrative there to kind of work with. So I put it in a drawer and I forgot about it. And then a few years later, I came back to it after I'd written some more books and went, oh, I think I know what's wrong with this. And I just went ahead and did a rewrite, and it flowed so much better. It's literally this book now. And I just was able to fix it up. So like you can put your bare bones draft down, and then like I think sometimes we think, oh, you know, once we've written the first book and the first manuscript that we've ever written, we then have to immediately publish it. That's not necessarily true. Like you can have a crack at writing and you can get something down that's actually really good, but you also know could be better, and you can come back in a year when you've had a bit more practice and go, oh, I know how to fix this, right? And that's the thing, you can do that. You don't have to put it out straight away, but you're not going to have that to improve on if you don't actually write it to begin with. So that's just something about that. I also find that when you're new to writing, like you can take workshops and courses, and they're very helpful, and they're very much like, so I have a writing course, and I go through many different foundational aspects of writing in that course, but there's still always more to learn. It's not going to teach you every single thing about writing, and you're also going to have your own strengths and weaknesses depending on what kind of writer you are. So you're not going to get everything out of one course or one workshop, and it's often this thing where you kind of just have to practice and you have to keep writing to improve. But I will say that one of the fastest ways you can improve is working directly with a coach like myself. What I notice when a lot of new writers come to me for writing coaching, and they kind of say, I have this manuscript I've been working on, and I take a look and I can see the flaws in it, it's very easy for me to go, your pacing could be better, here's a way you could improve it. And they're like, I don't even know what pacing is. And I'm like, here you go, like this is what pacing is, look at how it improves, right? Or I could say your characters need some development, here are some suggestions, like here's how you could do that. And so someone who's more experienced and has done this a lot can look at your manuscript and very easily pinpoint what the problems are, even if you can't even name what those problems are at this point. And that's why you tend to improve very quickly. And I know that like one of my greatest examples is one of the very first clients I worked with ever. She was wanting to write a full-length book, and she had only ever managed short stories, and she didn't really have a good grasp on how to extend her narratives and have events flow from scene to scene, and kind of develop her characters. Those were her biggest weak points at the time. And so we set the goal to kind of just write like, you know, the first few chapters of a book. And we got to writing, and I kind of just week by week looked at her progress and went, here's some suggestions, here's some things we can do, where is it going next, let me know. And then by the end of 6 months, she had written half a book. And like our goal for the whole coaching was just to get a few chapters, because she'd only ever written a short story, and she had half a book, and she was like, it was coming so easily, and her quality of writing had improved so much. I was so impressed. I was like, this is amazing. Like, look at where you were 6 months ago. This is like really readable, and it's really good, and it flows really well. And so it's just like the leaps that you make with your quality of writing are definitely noticeable and significant when you work with someone who can give you that direct feedback, and it's just the fastest way to improve as you go. So I just find that to be true, and I just wanted to let you guys know, in case you're noticing that like you've written something and you notice potential, but you just know it's not there, something about it is not right, it's a little bit off, that's usually the fastest way to figure out what's wrong and improve on it, is to work directly with someone. Okay, so like I said, get your ideas, and they might come through at different stages. So you might get a bare bones idea. You might be like, okay, I want to write a self-help book about, I don't know, like how to do content marketing, or I want to write a memoir about this time I went to Europe, or I want to write an enemies to lovers romance, right? Like you get the bare bones idea, you get a couple of concepts for things you want to talk about. What you want to try and do is expand them out. And so if you're writing fiction, like I always like to use this example with the dragon and the princess. So if you're writing fiction, that might look like the dragon kidnaps the princess, the knight goes to save the princess, they get married, right? Like those are like 3 major plot points that you know you want to cover in the book. It doesn't mean they're going to happen like in the beginning, middle, and end. It just means that those are 3 things you're clear on that you can weave a pathway of events to. So it doesn't matter if they're, you know, maybe they're all in the beginning of the book and you only have half the book figured out. That's okay. Just figure out 3, because that's going to help you start to weave a path of events. If you're going to write, you know, a self-help book, I like to think of it more like blogging when you do it that way. So you might decide, okay, I'm going to write about content marketing, and here's some specific subheaders of content marketing that I want to touch on. And think of it like a blog post. Just imagine you're writing a really long blog post and you're like, okay, or it could even be a guide, right? And it's like, here's a header, here's what we're going to expand on, here's another header, here's what we're going to expand on. And just keep going till you have a bit of an outline for what you want to talk about. So that's the way you can do that. If you're going to write a memoir, so what I noticed with memoirs is, or even like biographies, they're a little bit different because one is more centered on a specific event, the other one is more of a life story, right? So just figuring out like, okay, what are some major points of this particular topic or event in my life, or of my life in general, do I want to talk about, and why? What is the goal? Like, how is this going to help someone? How is this going to impact or change someone? Like, what stories are relevant to share, and in what order? And so it can be really helpful to kind of look at the whole thing. Like maybe, I'm just going to make something up. Maybe you're talking about how you went to Europe and you were really afraid of backpacking and you just didn't know how you were going to get by, and then you found this dream job, and it was the story of like how you became an entrepreneur for this dream job, you learnt the skills, and then you started a business, and then, you know, all this stuff happened. So like the 3 major plot points could be like, 1, you had the courage to leave to go to another country as a backpacker. 2, you found a job, how did you do that? And you developed skills at this job, what was it like? And then 3, you decided to start a business from that. So how did that decision come about? So like those are like the 3 major things in your memoir that you could weave a path of events to. And you can figure out like, what are the chapters that are going to link this up, and what are some of the turning points that happened, and some of the life lessons I can share throughout that journey, right? And so usually that path of events is very helpful thinking. Okay, so then you want to, like I said, kind of figure out how you're going to get from A to B. So I often try to think about, okay, like coming back to the princess and dragon example. So if the princess gets kidnapped by the dragon, why? Like that's the first question that comes to mind. Why does this happen? How does it happen? I like to just start answering questions, right? So maybe the dragon kidnaps the princess because it was bribed into it by a wizard or something. And like how could be, you know, flew in on a ball that was happening, right? Like you just make stuff up. And then the knight goes to save her. Why? Maybe they're engaged, or maybe he needs a monetary reward and there's one being offered. So you just start answering questions. And then how? He has to find a magic sword first that's specific for dragon slaying. Where is it? It's in a magic forest. How does he get to the forest? He has to go on a long journey for a horse. It takes 3 days. How does he find it? He has to stop by an inn and he has to talk to an elf, and the elf misleads him. Like you can just start adding stuff, right? Until you have this path of events that gets you to the end. And so same thing in your memoir, but this is going to be based on fact, is like, what are the key events that are relevant and make sense that you can touch on, that you can expand on, that you can share, right? So, in your self-help, it's like, what's the best order to explain the process that you're trying to teach people? So it's a little bit different because it's a bit more structural, but it's kind of the same, right? So that's basically what you want to do to flesh it out. You don't have to have clarity on your whole story when you begin, and this is really just to help you know what you're doing with your writing time. You might prefer to be like, I want to write an enemies to lovers romance, that's my bare bones idea, off I go. Like, you may not have nothing else. You may just be like, here's the two characters, here's some things about them I know. I want one to be like this, I want the other one to be like that, personality-wise. And then I want it to be set at, I don't know, in the Wild West. Done, off you go. Like, you don't have to have it all figured out. It just depends on how you like to write. But I find that if you do have at least this pathway of events, you can change it as you go. You don't have to stick to it, but if you at least have that, it helps you to get started. It helps you to figure things out as you go. It helps you to feel like you're being productive with your time. And the other piece of advice I'll give you here is that if you start writing something, so maybe it makes sense logically on paper. Maybe you've decided, okay, the next step is that the knight is going to go talk to this elf about where he's going to find the sword. And maybe you start writing that, and then you have a lot of resistance in the moment of writing that. And you're like, no, this makes logical sense because the next thing he's got to do is go find it in a cave. And you're like, but this is how I'm going to get there. And then you're writing it, and you're like, but I'm so bored. But I just don't want to write it like this. I don't want there to be an elf. I want to do something else. Follow the intuitive nudge. If you're like, this is not working, scrap it. Start something different. Try a new direction. You're allowed to change your mind as you go. And oftentimes you can kind of take a new direction and bring it back to another plot point you were going to go to, or you can just scrap all the plot points from that point forward and try something new, and it doesn't matter. But at least then you have something that's guiding you in the moment, right? So that's kind of some tips for just doing that part of it. Now, here's where I teach writing a bit differently to a lot of other people, so I'm going to explain my process to you. But I find a lot of people get hung up in the writing process around word count goals and chapter lengths and, you know, just like these little insignificant details. And it's because if you're familiar with the writing community in general, they do tend to thrive a lot on things that keep you accountable. So it's like, I'm going to aim to write 500 words a day, or going to aim to make sure every chapter is 10 pages, or, you know, whatever. I don't write like that. I feel like that is too rigid, and it might help to keep you accountable. So if it works for you, that's fine. You can absolutely have word count goals, but don't obsess over them to the point where if you don't hit your goal, you're like, oh, what a failed writing day. I didn't get my word count goal down. I didn't do what I was meant to do. I don't look at it that way. I often look at any progress as good progress, because some days, like, you're having that thing where you have a bit of resistance and you're having to rethink the idea and change direction and figure out what's wrong with it and get clarity on something. Like, these days are going to come up. So of course, if you're spending half of your writing time working through stuff in your mind, you're not going to hit your word count goal. So you're not a failure because you had to do that, because you're getting clearer on the right path to take in your story, and you would have been having to do more legwork and reworking if you'd just gone with your original idea and did it just to get to a word count goal, right? So I often, if I only write 3 pages and I'm like, okay, that was barely anything, but I got something down, or I figured out which direction I want to take, or I just like got through the scene that was feeling really difficult, I consider it a win. And then if I have a 10K word count writing day, which I've done a lot, I consider that a win. Like, there's really nothing like, I don't really work in these patterns and rigid structures, right? And so that's just something to keep in mind. And also because, like, if I show you this book again, this one, you're allowed to change your mind as you go. And oftentimes you can kind of take a new direction and bring it back to another plot point you were going to go to, or you can just scrap all the plot points from that point forward and try something new, and it doesn't matter. But at least then you have something that's guiding you in the moment, right? So that's kind of some tips for just doing that part of it. Now, here's where I teach writing a bit differently to a lot of other people, so I'm going to explain my process to you. But I find a lot of people get hung up in the writing process around word count goals and chapter lengths and, you know, just like these little insignificant details. And it's because if you're familiar with the writing community in general, they do tend to thrive a lot on things that keep you accountable. So it's like, I'm going to aim to write 500 words a day, or going to aim to make sure every chapter is 10 pages, or, you know, whatever. I don't write like that. I feel like that is too rigid, and it might help to keep you accountable. So if it works for you, that's fine. You can absolutely have word count goals, but don't obsess over them to the point where if you don't hit your goal, you're like, oh, what a failed writing day. I didn't get my word count goal down. I didn't do what I was meant to do. I don't look at it that way. I often look at any progress as good progress, because some days, like, you're having that thing where you have a bit of resistance and you're having to rethink the idea and change direction and figure out what's wrong with it and get clarity on something, like these days are going to come up. So of course, if you're spending half of your writing time working through stuff in your mind, you're not going to hit your word count goal. So you're not a failure because you had to do that, because you're getting clearer on the right path to take in your story, and you would have been having to do more legwork and reworking if you'd just gone with your original idea and did it just to get to a word count goal, right? So I often, if I only write 3 pages and I'm like, okay, that was barely anything, but I got something down, or I figured out which direction I want to take, or I just got through the scene that was feeling really difficult, I consider it a win. And then if I have a 10K word count writing day, which I've done a lot, I consider that a win. There's really nothing I don't really work in these patterns and rigid structures, right? And so that's just something to keep in mind. And also because, if I show you this book again, this one, so this is where my writing process, I'm going to dive into it, but I am really about the narrative. And so when I write, and I'm writing my first draft, I don't try to focus on everything. I focus on the characters, I focus on the plot line, and I focus on the conflicts, stakes, and motivations, but I kind of group those 3 together. So these are 3 different things that I'm focusing on, and then I don't really focus on anything else. It doesn't mean I don't include it, it just means that it's not a priority for me. So if I'm okay, I'm gonna write a book, this is about mermaids, by the way, so I'm I'm gonna write a book about mermaids, and she's gonna go to this underwater world, and she's gonna meet this prince, and they're gonna go on an adventure together. I will be okay, so who are my characters? Let's get clear on them. What are they doing in this book? Let's get clear on that. What are some of the obstacles that come up? Let's get clear on those. And then I start writing. And I just get that down, right? And of course, as I'm writing it, I'm also having to think about, okay, what settings are coming up? Let's just lay the bare bones foundation for that. But I don't get super in detail and go, okay, I've got to build out every single detail. I know exactly how the palace looks, and I've got to look at all the right terms for the architecture and make sure it's all accurate, and double check my time stuff, period history stuff, and I've got to figure out the descriptions, and I've got to figure out the pacing, and I've got to change the dialogue so all the characters sound different. I don't focus on any of that. I'm just here's what's going on, here's what they're saying to each other, here's where they're going, here's what's happening, and I just focus on that. And so because I do it that way, and that's how I usually teach it, and I'll explain why I teach it like that in a minute, but because I do that, this book was 40,000 words the first time I wrote it. The first draft, it was not fleshed out, and I actually didn't have the ending down at that point. I thought I was halfway done, and I was I thought I was at the halfway point, but I was actually maybe 5 chapters off the end. I just didn't realize it at first. And that's because at this point, I also didn't realize it was a duology. I thought it was a single book. And then I was oh, the reason that I wasn't clear on the ending was because it was the second book, and I hadn't even gotten there yet. So I did that, and it was 40,000 words. And if I had been okay, but I've got to hit this amount of words every day, and I've got to make sure the chapters are this long, I would have had to do so much reworking, because all I did the second time when I went back to rewrite it was look at the 40,000 words and go, what do I need to improve? I need to add some chapters here to flesh this out. I need to add description here to flesh that out. I need to change the pacing here. I need to rework the dialogue here. And then suddenly I had 85,000 words because I just went through and polished it, And so what might happen is that you focus on getting your bare bones draft down, and maybe you end up with something 30,000 words, and you're that's not enough to be a book, and you're that's fine, because you come back later and you fix it up. And so what I teach is narrative or storytelling elements, and then enhancement elements. So storytelling is when you focus on your characters, your conflict, the setting. Sorry, not setting. Characters, conflict, and what was the other one I said before? Plot, sorry. Those 3, right? And then your enhancement elements are setting, dialogue, description, pacing, right? And those are things that improve what you've already got down. So the reason I teach it like this is because it's so hard to improve a blank page, and it's so hard to sit there and go, this has to read like a masterpiece, and so I have to consider everything at once, and I have to make sure the chapter is really fleshed out. It's going to take you forever to write like that. You can if you want, but you're going to be there for a really long time. You're going to be nitpicking over a lot of stuff, and it's just going to feel harder because there's nothing to work with. You're doing it all from your bare bones imagination, right from scratch, and you're having to figure it all out in one hit, right? If you just get the narrative down, you can always improve on the narrative later, and it's going to be easier because you have something to work with, right? And so that's why I would really encourage you when you're writing, even if you're doing a memoir, just recount, like you're writing a diary entry, just recount the things you're trying to talk about, and then go back and make it readable, make it polished, make it more engaging and descriptive. And that's going to help you to flesh it out properly and to figure out the structure of everything and the chapter stuff. And so that's really my writing process. That's how I teach it. I teach it for that reason. It always ends up working so well for my clients. And there was something else I wanted to say on that, but it's not coming to mind, so hopefully it comes back to me. But hopefully that makes sense. If you're really struggling, you're just like, this is not reading the way I want it to, it's not meant to read good with a first draft, it's not meant to read good, you're meant to go back and fix it later. So don't worry about it, okay? Okay, so that's that, and like, oh, that's what I wanted to say, sorry. So like, you're channeling your narrative, right? I just wanted to talk about how I learnt that technique, really. I used to take drama in high school, and what I noticed, I was a really bad actor in drama, but I was a really good playwright, writing the scripts for the plays. And what I noticed when you write the scripts for the plays is that you only write dialogue, and then you have stage cues that kind of talk about what's going on, so you have some context. So it's dialogue driven, which also means it's character driven, because the characters are the ones having to talk the dialogue and act it out. And what I noticed is that when you're acting on stage, and even like not Broadway, just like on a general stage with a black background and some props, right, and you're dressed in black, your actors are having to take the raw dialogue and shape it into a narrative that is entertaining for people to watch. So you've got these actors that are playing characters, and they're using the dialogue to portray a storyline, like a narrative, a plot, and then they're having these conflicts that make it engaging to watch. And they don't have setting, they don't have pacing, and they have the dialogue, but that's what they're working with, right? And they make the setting known with their props and their acting. And so it's just proof that like people are engaged by narrative. They're not so engaged by the enhancement details. The thing about choosing to write and choosing that as a medium to tell a story is that is just what makes it more enjoyable for them, is to make sure it's well written afterwards, right? But what's going to hook them, what's going to be the thing that matters most, is the raw narrative that comes out the first time you write something, right? That's why we teach it that way, or that's why I teach it that way. And you have to trust that whatever is coming through in that moment is what's meant to be on the page. Like that raw manuscript that I wrote in a week was exactly that. It was just a story. It wasn't well written, it wasn't good, but the raw potential was always there. That's why I was able to go back years later, look at it and make sense of it, and go, I can rewrite this and make it better, because the actual storyline, the plot, had potential to it, right? So like I said, don't worry about whether it reads well. You do want it to read well, that's important for a book, but that comes later. You don't have to do all that yourself. You just need to focus on what story you're trying to tell, why are you choosing to write this book, who is it for, what does it mean to you, what are you trying to convey, what kind of vibe does it have, how do you want people to feel reading it, and channel that into your story and just focus on getting that down, right? And that's what's going to help you get to the next step. Okay, so then we want to talk about how do we improve it after that. So this is when you've done the whole first draft, however long it takes you. So like I said, working with a coach can be helpful. Taking workshops and courses are helpful. So one of the first things you might want to do, and this can even come in before you hire a coach, is find a beta reader to read it, and they're going to give you feedback. And it's going to be scary. And it's probably not going to be good if it's your first book, but keep in mind that that's why you're getting the feedback. You can do a beta reader, or you can do a critique partner. It doesn't really matter. Both these people, usually critique partners are paid. It's the only difference. Beta readers are usually free. And the trade-off with beta readers is that they may or may not actually read the book, depending how busy they are. They might say they will, and then they might not. But if you pay a critique partner, they have to give you feedback, which is why I prefer them. So whichever one you pick, they're going to read through it. They're going to tell you what they liked. They're going to tell you what they didn't like. They're going to tell you what they think you can improve and why. I recommend getting 2 to 3 at a minimum if you're a first-time writer and you don't know your own strengths and weaknesses, because everyone's probably going to come back with different feedback, and then you need to look at it and you need to filter it. So you want to look at that feedback you're getting and go, does this align with the actual story vision I'm trying to create in the first place? If you wanted to write a tragic love story and they're coming back saying, I just don't like the characters, they're really boring and moody and depressing, and I think you should make them more happy, and I think you should have more happy scenes in here, If that doesn't fit with what you're trying to convey, which is a tragic love story, then the feedback may not be make them happy. The feedback could just be they're not currently likable characters. So you need a way to make the characters likable without trading off the kind of story you're trying to write, right? So not every feedback you get is going to be straight away applicable, and you have to be able to filter what is and isn't relevant. But then if you're getting the same kind of feedback a lot, that's also an indicator of something that needs to be improved on that maybe you haven't got a grasp on yet. So it could be pacing, could be description, right? It's just going to give you an idea of where your writing's at skill-wise and what you might need to improve on. And then that helps because then you can go, okay, like my world building is terrible. I need to go read some craft books on world building. Or my characterization's bad. I'm going to go take a workshop. Or the general structure of the story is bad. I'm going to hire a coach to help me restructure it, right? Like whatever feedback comes through is just going to help you know what next steps to take to make it better. And so that's something you can do. And then that's going to help you with the revision process. So the amount of revisions you need is just going to, again, depend on your writing process and how skilled you are and how confident you are. At this point in time, after having written so many books, I usually do one revision and then my book goes to an editor. But when I was in the early days, like it would take a couple of revisions actually. It would take maybe 2 or 3. And it just was like dependent on what I was working through. So you might do one revision where you're just focused on getting the structure better. And then you might do another one where you focus on getting the characters more likable. And then you might do another one where you just improve the world building. And that's all your revisions. As you get better and better, you might be able to do all of the revision stuff in one single revision, one kind of read through and work through of your book. Because at that point, you've gotten a grasp on how to structure something right as you're writing it. And you've gotten a grasp on how to pace something as you're writing it, so you're not having to go back and rework this every time, right? So you're going to get better as you write more books, but you just need to be aware your revisions could be longer and you might have more of them, just depending where your skill set is in the beginning, and that's okay. All right, so then the next thing you can do, the next thing you want to do is editing. So editing is, I want to just clarify this because I want to talk about publishing in the next video, but if you're going to traditionally publish, you don't pay editors. If you're going to self-publish, you do need to pay your own editors. You need to find and source your own editors, but don't go paying editors if you're going to traditionally publish, because they're going to put you through rounds of editing, which means you're just going to pay for something that you were already going to get, and it's a waste of money, quite frankly, unless you're so uncertain about your book that you want to have a paid editor maybe the first 1 or 2 times you do a book. I really don't recommend it. But the next step will be editors. So I want to go through the kinds of editors that you have and which ones you might need to look into. And again, if you're going to traditionally publish, they do all these for you. So first you have a developmental editor. That's the first one that comes through. It's the first one you want to figure out. After you've done revisions, after you've had feedback from beta readers, after you've gotten your book to as good as you can get it on your own, then you take it to a developmental editor and you say, help me make it even better. And they have the trained critical eye to look at every single aspect and figure out what is still off about it. So they might go, your world building still needs some improvement, here's how you can do that. Or they might say, did you consider this about the character? Or they might say there's an inconsistency here based on time period, or like whatever the feedback is. So they're just like a really helpful person if you're not really clear or confident in your ability to develop your story into something good. Then you have line editors, and they help you with the structure of the book. So they will go through and make sure your sentences read properly and everything flows, and that you don't have any awkwardly written sentences that's going to pull people out of the reading experience. So they will help you to structure it, and that's usually very helpful if English isn't your first language as well, because they just pick up on things that you wouldn't know if you weren't a native speaker. And then finally you have proofreading, and proofreading is grammar. So it's just making sure there's no typos and all your punctuation is done correctly and all that stuff. And they will also cross-check like whether you've used the right words for things. So like, for example, I have a novella called Heart of Stone and Seafoam, and I wrote it seafoam one word, and it's meant to be seafoam with a hyphen because apparently they mean 2 different things. Like one means a color, one means the actual seafoam. And so I didn't know that, and they were like, you need to title it this because otherwise it's wrong. But that's usually what's going to help you get it to the most polished place, and then you can start to publish it. So hopefully that's been helpful. Hopefully you got some insights from that. Like I said, just to recap, don't worry about all the little different things about writing. Don't worry about writing an engaging opening or getting your characters right or creating engaging conflicts at this stage, you can definitely do some research on your own around that, so you can go into your book as prepared as possible if you feel like you need it, if you feel like you need the clarity to get started. Otherwise, just, like I said, ask yourself, what kind of book am I trying to write? Get clear on that, and then start writing it. And see what comes out first, get your first draft down, and then you can go back and improve on it. And that's what I would recommend doing. And you're going to get there by just creating a regular writing habit. So you don't have to write 500 words a day. You can just say, every Saturday I'm going to do an hour of writing, and whatever comes out is going to be enough, and it's going to be good, and I'm going to get writing done that way. And that's all you have to do. So that is what I recommend, and I will chat to you in the next video about publishing.